Green building rating systems. Voluntary systems. Why do we need those, Mark? Why don't we just have a code and be done with it? Well, I'll tell you why, at least my opinion. It's because if people build to code, they build the worst building they can legally build. Nothing against building to a stretch code. But if it's sort of a mamby-pamby kind of a code, it's not so much. And since we don't have one here, and people focus more and more and more on first cost as opposed to life cycle cost, that's just insane. I mean, I'll tell you, we do energy audits. We've done a few million square feet of energy audits the past year. And if I can walk through a building that's only 2 or 3 years old and identify a series of important investments that can be made, energy conservation measures that can be invested in those very new buildings that will have maybe a 2 to 3 year simple payback to positive cash flow, even without the excellent incentives that APS and Salt River Project have, that's embarrassing. I'm sorry, but as a design professional, that's downright embarrassing. Because people were so focused on first cost alone instead of a mix. Life cycle cost, a little bit more of an elaborate, owner-driven basis. And they are not all developer buildings that I'm speaking of. But voluntary programs reward people for building above code. Incentive programs like APS Solutions for Business, or SRP Business Solutions, or the National Bank of Arizona's financing programs, or Energize Phoenix. These programs give you cash money, right? They pay you. And sometimes, I'll show you an example, when you apply the low interest loan of 6.24% over 60 months, you get to a situation where your savings exceed your costs. Why aren't people just tearing down the walls to run through them and go do this? I don't know. It should be happening, but voluntary programs are critical. We should have a tough code, should be a good code, a code that can be handled. It will improve over time, but then we should have voluntary programs to reward people for going above and beyond. Because what that will do is it'll build case studies that people can recognize. They can build to certain standards, exceed them, and then brag about them to their friends. Or they can position themselves as being the most focused on energy efficiency and the environment. Or they can claim their Energy Star logo. They can be very proud as they demonstrate that they're meeting these programs. Critical. Rating systems, codes, and standards. Prescriptive and performance. We spoke about that. Prescriptive and performance-based. There's a lot of entities that are saying we need to move towards net zero energy. You know what that means? Well, there's a variety of definitions, but let's consider net zero site energy. On an annualized basis, summarized, that says that the building would produce at least the same amount of energy that it consumed over that previous year. It doesn't have to be a one-for-one at every given instant, but if it's 100,000 kilowatt hours that are consumed in the year, 100,000 kilowatt hours that are generated on site, then that would be a net zero site energy. There are entities, you've heard of some of them, ASHRAE, AIA, that are driving to this. They're not kidding. They're moving in that direction. So we look at it and we say, all right, how are we going to deal with existing buildings? Because fully 80% of the buildings that'll be here in 2050 are already here, right? We're in one. This isn't going anywhere between now and 2050 unless there's some pretty serious issue, right? But think about that. What are we going to do with those? There's another standard. The ASHRAE Standard 100, R, or 100, 2006 R. It's being redone now. And if you talk to Gordon Holness about it specifically, who's leading the charge for ASHRAE, you recognize that this code, he's focusing on it being a performance-based code, very specifically. We want you to target a certain CBEX guideline, a certain EUI, Commercial Building Energy Consumption Survey, some baseline comparison. Remember, if it's measured and reported, it can be managed and improved. So we come up with these measurements and we strive towards them. And then creative, bright folks like us can get together and identify ways to do it and demonstrate our knowledge and, our wisdom. as to how to do this, and not just build to that level of the code. And we're going to get accolades. We're going to take advantage of APS Solutions for Business programs or SRP Business Solutions programs. We're going to leverage incentives that we get from the federal government. This is what we're going to do. Because honestly, that's a whole lot more fun, I think, than just designing a building to meet code for first cost. We see voluntary programs and mandatory. We need the mandatory. We need to know where the wall is. Buildings are not useful, in my opinion, unless they have at least some walls, right? We need some level of a code as to a performance that we can work from. And voluntary programs allow us to do that. This is a fabulous location. If you ever get the opportunity and you're having a sleepless night and you've got a computer in your lap, you don't feel like watching infomercials, then go ahead and pull this up if you care about codes. This is the Energy Codes Universe, which is really quite a brilliant little site. EnergyCodesOcean.org. The future of energy codes, okay? What we're seeing here with this universe, model code developers like ICC. We notice 4 dots here on these rings. That means that ICC is involved in the development, the adoption, the implementation, and the enforcement of codes. We look now, there are manufacturing groups like NAMA and others that focus on the energy efficiency of equipment and devices and technology. Building industry. NAHB is engaged in the development and adoption of codes. Regional groups. We've got a variety of them. SWEEP, for example, Southwest Energy Efficiency Program. Jeff Schlegel locally. They do some wonderful work. So we see all these different groups engaged. Government. The EIEIO is not up there, by the way. I looked for it, so don't go looking. Advocates. We have all of these individuals and groups that are engaged in the energy enterprise. And as you click over each of these, then it gives you information about what that organization is. So to me, it's fascinating. It's a great information. I recommend you look there. ICC, Membership Association dedicated to ultimately building safety and fire. That was the beginning, correct? And now it has moved to develop the I-codes, 14 different codes, the family of codes that are adopted in all 50 states, in many, many, many of the countries around the world. And now there's also the IECC, the International Energy Conservation Code. They also provide training, certification, and code interpretation services. They're constantly improving these. Because to implement codes is to do market transformation. Creating awareness about the codes and the standards. Educating people as to how to build to them. And building demand for them. Advocacy, interacting with various jurisdictions, people who are involved in code development and enforcement, and ensuring that they're implemented throughout areas.